Hi everyone, I'm Hannah.
And I'm Emily.
And we are the hosts of the I Don't Think So podcast, where we decide if we think a conspiracy theory is believable or if we don't think so.
This podcast is affiliated with the Flurry Sports podcast, so feel free to go and check them out. And here we will present our theories to you on every Wednesday. If you like what you hear, give us a like and a share, and maybe a follow us on Twitter at IDon'tThinkSo_EH.
Yeah, check us out there. So last episode, we had our brothers on who host the Flurry Sports podcast, Zach and Jake, and they presented us some sports conspiracy theories to kind of get the ball rolling and let us see what we wanted to do. Now, although our brothers are really into sports, we like watching them sometimes.
Every once in a while.
But don't have a lot to share about them.
Not super big sports gals on the I Don't Think So podcast.
Yeah, like I enjoy listening to them and I enjoy watching them, but I don't know who anybody is. I don't know anyone's stats. I don't know who's supposed to win. We did like a fantasy football draft one time and I somehow got second place like the first year and got really cocky, like felt very confident and then got last place every year after that and stopped doing it. So just if you are coming here for sports conspiracies, we will have different ones, but they will still be fun. The first one we're going to do together, I was kind of thinking about some of the suggestions that Zach and Jake had given at the end of the last podcast, and one of them they had brought up was the Titanic. Now, Emily hasn't heard any of this. She didn't know what I prepared. And I decided that I wasn't really into the actual, like, real facts of the sinking of the Titanic.
Never.
Which I think it could be something we cover later because I have done some I did like dive into that a little bit too, and it was actually very interesting. But that is not what we are talking about today. Today, we're talking about the movie Titanic.
Oh no, I haven't seen that movie in maybe 10 years. I probably watched it when I was around 10, and I'm 23 now, so
right,
you
like
do
I
that
remember
math.
watching it on the VHS, and you had to put the multiple VHSs in because it was too long.
I know very little about that movie, except for
I know
I should have watched it apparently. Except for every once in a while on TikTok, I'll see the old both Rose and Jack could have fit on the door.
Yes, and so when everyone thinks of the movie, I feel like the conspiracy is why did they kill off Jack? Both of them definitely could have fit on the door. Like people doing the math of like the size of her body and his body with the size of the door and all of the different proportions. And that's not what we're talking about today either.
Get rid of it.
But to start, I just wanted you, Emily, to kind of talk about what you remember happening in the movie. Now, I know it's a long movie, so you can like touch the highlights, anything that you thought was like super important, just to give us a preview of what you remember.
Well, unfortunately, this is going to be a very short summary. So what I really remember was that Jack was poor. Did he sneak on the Titanic? No.
Yes. Just share what you think, and then we'll fill you in later.
I don't know. I don't remember if he snuck on the Titanic or not, but when he got there, he saw Rose, who was this very affluent woman with a very affluent family. And of course, being Leo, he was like, oh, I'm just such a nice guy and I'm so good looking. Look past the fact that I am poor. Don't mind me. And so throughout the whole movie, it's just them connecting. He was an artist. I remember that part because it's the old draw me like one of your French girls scenes where she poses naked and he draws her, which I had a friend who went to art school and said that like nude, people drawing you nude was like the most painful experience because she modeled. She was like the nude model and she's like, people were crying trying to draw my boobs. And I was like, well,
that's so sad.
That would ruin my self-esteem. Thank you. Anyways. But that's where the draw me like one of your French girls comes in. And then as the movie goes on, everyone knows the whole tale of the Titanic. They hit an iceberg. The violins are playing. Both of them get tossed into the water. There's bodies all over the place. And Rose is like, I'll never let go. As she's like laying on the door. And he freezes. Like stuck to it. And she has to literally like pry his hands off.
Yes.
And I was like, I remember thinking back then, I was like, if you weren't going to let go, why didn't you just, I know he's dead, but maybe you could just bring him to safety with you. At least he can have a funeral.
Like, drag him.
He was frozen. You had to peel him off. Come on. Leave him on there. Give him a little pat. And he sank, which I was like,
yeah, I don't know about
human
that.
Bodies don't sink.
As everyone else is floating, they did have life vests on, but I feel like everyone else was floating with like as icicles, and he's the only one that sunk
to the bottom.
So yeah,
that's all I remember.
Okay, so the movie is all obviously based on the real sinking of the Titanic. Which launched from Southampton, UK on April 10th, 1912, and then made a stop in France, and then they ended up sinking in the North Atlantic Ocean in the early morning of April 15th, 1912. It was like 2:20 in the morning. So they end up hitting this iceberg on the 14th, and then obviously, like, it was late at night too, so everything was doing that. They're trying to get people off, and then it ends up sinking, and it's the largest death toll of like a non-war ship sinking to this day. So it was like a big, huge thing. And so they ended up making this movie, right? And there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily accurate as they're making this more cinematically appealing to people and things like that. But what my conspiracy theory is to present is that Jack is actually a time traveler from the future that was sent back because in an early scene of the movie, when Jack first starts talking to Rose, if you might remember, she was standing up on the railing because she was so depressed and sad about how when they got to New York, because that's where the ship was supposed to be sailing to, she was going to be forced to marry to this other man and then just kind of continue their legacy of having money and things like that. Yeah. Pretty much because her father had passed away, this was kind of like securing the wealth of her mother and her. Okay. And she was like, I'm an independent woman. I don't want to marry a man. I'd rather just die. So she is about to jump off the back of the boat. And this is where Jack starts talking to her and saying like, oh, I don't want to jump. You shouldn't jump kind of thing. And so the thought is that he is a time traveler to try to continue of her not jumping off because that would have slowed. If she would have jumped off, the boat would have had to stop to try to like retrieve her body. That was supposedly the like how they're supposed to handle those types of things. And then that would have caused a break in the time-space continuum by them not hitting this iceberg and not sinking the Titanic. And it would have changed life as we know it now. Okay? So, following me so far?
I think so.
So pretty much he goes back just to try to make sure that the Titanic sinks. With it first starting with her not jumping off the back of the boat. Now, I have prepared some evidence.
Okay, good, great.
That kind of leans into the fact of why we might believe that Jack is a time traveler, okay?
Okay, good. I need some.
So, to start, as you were saying, you're like, I can't remember if he snuck on the boat or how it happened. Well, when the movie starts with him gambling and playing this, I think they're playing poker, some sort of card game, where he ends up winning a ticket to get on this boat.
Oh.
Because he has no money. And so the theory says that he would have not had any money that would have been appropriate for the early 1910s. So he wouldn't have had money that he could have like paid out because he wouldn't have had money of that time in Europe if he was a time traveler. So then he would have had
shot
to
on
like
back.
yeah, so he would have had to like gamble his way to try to winning this ticket to get on the boat.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the first piece. I don't know how believable that
I
is.
don't know. If he's able to time travel, he can't time travel with some coins?
That's what I was kind of thinking. Like, why would he travel back without any money? Like, I feel like someone in charge of the time traveling would like have
Like,
some
hey,
money that they could use.
by the way, you gotta, maybe he had a gambling problem, so he did have money, because you have to buy in a lot of times to like poker games or blackjack or whatever the heck, casinos, anything like that. You usually have to pay a fee to enter in, and maybe he just has a gambling addiction.
Adding to the theory.
He's a time traveler with a gambling addiction.
And this was his therapy.
This was it. And then they sent him back with money, and they're like, you need to go, you need to buy a ticket for the Titanic and do this whole shebang shaboom. And he gambled all the money away, and it just so happened that he also was like, okay, I have no more money. How am I going to get on the Titanic? I could win it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
Interesting. Okay.
Add to the theory.
I like it. So the next point kind of goes back to when Rose and Jack first meet. And this is a point that we have brought up in our childhood. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but in the movie, Jack states that he's like, you don't want to jump into the water. It's going to be really cold. Do you remember this line?
Yes.
As I'm leading into it. Because as a kid, he said that he was ice fishing on Lake Wissota.
Oh.
And fell into the water because the ice broke and it was freezing cold and he almost didn't survive it. Now, what do we know about Lake Wissota?
Well, Lake Wissota is this man-made lake in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, where I don't think it was it made in 1912?
It was not.
Oh.
Okay, so this is part of the reason why I was thinking about this theory. So I remember when we were kids growing up, we always went to this camp that was on Lake Wissota, and they would tell us this scary story about the thing, and how they would always say like, oh, do you remember how Jack from the Titanic says this line about how he went ice fishing on Lake Wissota, but it couldn't have happened because the lake wasn't formed yet. And so I thought this was kind of interesting. I did some research about Lake Wissota, and the lake was actually formed by the construction of the Wissota Hydroelectric Dam on the Chippewa River, and it wasn't completed until 1917, which would be 5 years after the sinking of the Titanic. And then this is just a little bit like tidbit that I thought was funny. So it says the dam was built by the Wisconsin Minnesota Light and Power Company, and so they came up with the name Wissota by combining Wisconsin and Minnesota. I never knew that.
Never gotten that. I just was like, okay, it's Lake Wissota. Cool lake. Also cold. It's cold in the summer too, so
it is.
Checks out that it be very cold in the Wisconsin winters.
So this is the next point, is that he is telling a story about something that wasn't even formed until after the Titanic was sunk. Interesting.
See.
Yes.
Weird.
And now this isn't the only time that he is quoted talking about going somewhere or being someplace that was formed actually after the sinking of the Titanic. So later there's this really like memorable scene, you know how they're like standing and she's got her arms out and everyone does the Titanic pose and it's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
I'm flying.
I'm flying.
Yes, that one. So during that scene, Jack's standing behind her and they're like talking all lovey-dovey to each other and he's like, I can't wait, I want to bring you to the Santa Monica Pier to ride this roller coaster. And the Santa Monica Pier, like with this roller coaster, it was built again after the sinking of the Titanic.
What in the world?
And so then this is the other thing to me. I'm like, so if he's supposed to be this poor kid that grew up in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and then also traveled to Santa Monica, and then also ended up in Europe where he was gambling money to get on the boat to like sail back to the United States, like this doesn't add up to me.
Something's not checking out.
Yeah, right? Isn't that odd?
If he isn't a time traveler, these directors did not do a single Google search.
Right?
I guess I don't know if Google. When did the movie come out?
I should look that up. That probably should
Anyways,
be part of my research.
But that's all right. But regardless, even if Google wasn't a thing, you had to do some research. And you're telling me you
this
put
movie
these in
came
there?
out in 1997, but Google was created in 1998.
Oh, okay.
So it was a year prior. However, I feel like quoting something like Lake Wissota is such a like odd tidbit. Like Chippewa Falls is a big-ish town around where we are, but it's not even like considered a city.
No, it's a town still.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that. As far as like cities go, it's not a city. It's a big town.
Yeah, I was just
Line and Kugel's beers from there, if you know.
Yeah, it only has 14,000 people. And so for someone to quote Chippewa Falls, I feel like they would have had to do a little bit of research about Lake Wissota before putting that tidbit into the movie. It was just odd to me. And then same thing with the Santa Monica Pier like tidbit. It was just odd. So then I have a couple other things. And this could be more of just like aesthetically appealing bits for the movie, right? So one thing is that Jack's hair was not like didn't match what would be popular at that time. And so he had like longer hair that he would slick back. And at the time, a lot of times people would do like a short like comb over kind of thing. And so at first when I was like looking at this part, I was like, well, I mean, they could have just did this because they thought Leo DiCaprio looked good with slick back hair, which is a fair point.
Agreed. You know?
However, other male actors in the movie were following more time correct hairstyles than he was. So it could have been done just to kind of like pull him out, I guess, make him see him more at the front of the movie, but it could also lead to the fact that he was not from that time period.
Well, and you got to think like the greasy kind of slick back greased hair wasn't a style really until the 1950s probably, where like greasers and like things like that kind of came out more often. And if he was a child on Lake Wissota, the lake would have had to have already been formed and people would have had to been like living on it, fishing it. If it had fish in it, I don't know much about how lakes are formed, but
I think the river flows into it.
Sure.
Like the Chippewa River flows into it and then the dam hits it. And that's how it keeps it level. Don't quote me on that, though.
Anyway, there's fish in it. So for him to be ice fishing, like he would have had to have been a child after this Titanic song. So it kind of makes sense if he had like a 1950s hairstyle. Because if he wasn't, you know, if he was 8 in 1920.
Exactly. Interesting. And then one other thing is that he is seen carrying around a backpack throughout the movie, and that's what he puts his belongings in. And backpacks were not like a common like accessory or bag choice until the 1930s, and that actually came about during like the Great Depression for people to like carry stuff in. So again, he's like having materials that weren't even close to the time period that the movie was set in. And so one thing I thought was odd, and again, I was thinking like, you know, these could have been just like artistic decisions for the movie. It doesn't necessarily need to be time period specific. However, this was like a major production. Like to make this movie that's this long, they had to do so much research to still base it on the actual event that's happened. Like there's so many little like blunders and things that came up that just made it for me like a little odd that there was like one thing after another that wasn't correct.
That's so true.
Isn't that weird?
Well, because like I said, like, you know, Google really wasn't a thing, so maybe this information wasn't super readily available. But to make these lines and to make these calls to very specific things, you would have had to do something. Encyclopedia, I don't know, whatever you need. But there's no way that you didn't do some research on these and know the research of like the styles, especially if everyone else in the movie is following the 1910s style of hair choice, style of dress choice. And then maybe, sure, like they're trying to differentiate Leo away from the rest of the cast. Like, see this person, he's the one you're focusing on.
Poor, but then it's like, if these are new things, you wouldn't think the poor person would be like up on style trends like decades before it's even supposed to happen.
I can't imagine backpacks were cheap if they were the new fashion, even in the Great Depression. You know, I can't imagine he's like, I can't afford to go on a ship that's gonna sink. However, I can afford a backpack.
Yeah. Well, and it still I remember even being a child and watching this and thinking it was so odd that this poor person ended up in the UK.
Yeah. How'd you get there? And he sinks. So maybe it was just like his little time traveling person like coming back down.
A gambling addiction. And that's why he got punished. They're like, this is your last hurrah. You got to go make sure the Titanic sinks and you're going down with it, buddy.
You're sinking to the bottom, baby. You'll wake up in Lake Wissota.
Or they're like, you know what's going to happen. You should be able to get out. But then he ends up falling in love with her and wants to save her instead of himself.
Have you watched Blackbird at all?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll explain the premise of the movie or the show for you. Great show if you want to watch it. I believe it's on Apple TV, which I don't know if you have. But it's based on a true story of where they believe this person committed a bunch of murders. However, he's in like kind of an asylum, like a mental health hospital.
Okay. And
everyone believes he's just a serial confessor. Like, no one believes he's actually done these murders except for like 2 people.
Interesting.
So they send in somebody from another prison to get him to discuss the murders and confess. And it's this whole series of like him trying to befriend him. And it kind of seems like, and we're not very far into it, but like he actually is kind of his friend. And then he'll say something off the wall about murdering women. And then he's like, ooh, maybe we're not friends. But that makes me think of Blackbird, where it's like he was sent in to ensure that this happened. However, I will go back to the whole like beginning of it, with stopping Rose from jumping off, and she was affluent, so it makes sense that maybe the boat would turn around for her versus a poor person. They would just be like, oh, peace, bon voyage. But how quickly do you think they would notice her
and be
jumping
able to
off?
stop it? Because if they could stop it, why didn't they stop it before they hit the iceberg?
You saw it coming. There's no way you didn't see it coming.
Right.
And then you're going to turn around this massive boat and try and fish a body that maybe will sink out of the water.
Yeah, they can't do it. They sink in there.
Everybody sinks. Anybody related to Leo, sink into the bottom.
Okay, so I guess now we have to decide. Do we agree that we think that Jack in the Titanic is a time traveler sent back to ensure that the Titanic sinks? Or do we not think so?
Well, it's tricky because part of me is like, either this movie has a ton of plot holes that if you dang it, but like makes reference to things and style choices way out of bounds of the time period and has these holes that don't make sense and don't line up, or Leo's a time traveler, which also feels a little weird, but it's a movie, so it's not like movies don't have people who time travel.
Well, and constantly, I feel like people within the movie business will put like hidden Easter eggs or like theories, like they build those into movies for like the fun of themselves.
Yeah.
Like even with Disney, like putting pictures, like writing stuff in the stars or like doing little like things that like they see, but it wouldn't be necessarily like picked up on people. Like maybe they were just like, this is going to be our little secret. And if people figure it out, like good for them.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to say, I think it's possible. I think this theory has legs. Strictly out of the basics of like, it's not real, regardless. It's a movie plot, it's whatever. You can't tell me that like they didn't do all this research and then made Leo
those mistakes. Yeah.
Somebody who seems not to be from this era. I think it's possible.
I agree. Like when I first started reading this, and maybe I like fed you into it because and when I first read this, I'm like, this seems like total baloney. Like there's no way that I've seen the movie so many times. Like there's like when I read this, there's no way that this is going to be like accurate at all.
No.
And then as I like pieced together a bunch of different things and started thinking of things myself and putting them in there, I'm like, oh my gosh, did he time travel?
How did you get there?
Especially because I don't know if have you seen The Umbrella Academy?
No.
Okay, so it's kind of like a superhero. It's based on a comic, and there's one of the siblings. It's pretty much like all these people were born on the same day, and this man adopts them all because all these kids have special powers. And one of the like number 5, the son number 5, he can time travel, and in the show they're like time traveling to make sure that events happen so that like the time continuum stays the same. So like make sure like Kennedy gets assassinated, make sure whatever happens. And so it's like major events that I was also thinking like maybe because since this was a comic, maybe some of the writers were like into the Umbrella Academy comics and kind of like sprinkled that inspiration into the movie.
Makes sense. Yeah, because when you first started, I was like, "Ooh, Hannah starting off with one that I'm like, I don't think so." But as soon as we started diving into it, like, there's just
too many
holes, too many things that like line up too perfectly, pointing in one direction. Time travel.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's a great like second episode for us. I hope
Mhm.
that you guys enjoyed listening to it, and let us know on our Twitter. Maybe we'll put up a poll or something, and you can vote on whether or not you think that Jack is a time traveler or not.
Yeah. If you have any conspiracy theories that you would think Hannah and I should check out, go ahead and also send those to us on Twitter. And we will link our email on there as well if you want to just send us some nice words.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Thanks. Bye.